telling this Australian couple about how Washington crossed the Delaware one winter and spent the next at Valley Forge, my mind went blank. I visualized that tiny bust of Washington back home, but it was mute. After briefly mentioning Washington's presidency, I just plain ran out of facts. Stalling for time, I took another bite of Bicky. After chewing that digestive biscuit once or twice, or maybe thrice, I suddenly remembered the dollar bill in my wallet, the only folding money I had not converted to Australian dollars. I took out the bill and used the engraved portrait of George Washington on its obverse as an emergency visual aid. I spoke of Washington's meticulous dress and his concomitant sense of decorum, his clenched lips and firm resolve, his calm eyes and penetrating gaze. If this good-natured Australian couple noticed that I had stopped providing them with facts about George Washington and started interpreting his portrait, they did not complain. They seemed genuinely pleased with what I told them. By the time I finished, the sun had almost disappeared below the horizon, and Washington's face appeared hazy in the dusk. Leaving their camper to return to my tent, now barely visible in the gloaming, I felt embarrassed that I could not say more about the man known as the father of his country, the father of my country. The present work, therefore, represents my second attempt to tell the story of George Washington's life. This new version is much different from the one I told around the tea table in that camper in the Blue Mountains. It is also much different from the numerous other book-length Washington biographies that have appeared at an astonishing rate over the past few decades. They, too, tell the familiar Washington stories, crossing the Delaware, wintering at Valley Forge, serving as president. In other words, they relate his active life as a soldier and a statesman. George Washington, A Life in Books, on the other hand, tells the story of his intellectual life, examining the man through the books he owned, read, and wrote. 100 years ago, Ezra Pound criticized American history textbooks for ignoring Washington's intellect. Pound's critique still applies. More often than not, Washington has been seen as a shelf filler, someone who decorated his home with books but seldom read them fully or deeply. Here's an alternate theory. Although George Washington never assembled a great library in the manner of, say, Benjamin Franklin or Thomas Jefferson, he did amass an impressive and diverse collection of books that he read closely and carefully, and that significantly influenced his thought and action. No one has ever written an intellectual biography of George Washington. Learning about my task, one historian sought to discourage me, asserting that the documentary materials simply do not exist to tell such a story. Unlike so many of the other founding fathers, he argued, Washington left little record of his intellectual life. Benjamin Franklin wrote a famous autobiography, among many other occasional pamphlets, essays, and letters, all of which dramatize his lifelong interest in reading and writing. Thomas Jefferson's voluminous correspondence and his massive library provide access to his mind. And John Adams recorded his agreements and disagreements with authors in the margins of his books. Though Washington's surviving comments about books and reading are not nearly as extensive as those of other founding fathers, he did leave many different types of evidence that, in the aggregate, can help to reconstruct his life of the mind. The evidence takes many different forms. Surviving books. Though Washington's library was widely dispersed during the 19th century, many of his books do survive. The Boston Athenaeum holds the single largest collection of books formerly in his possession. Additional books survive at Mount Vernon. Other libraries, the Firestone Library at Princeton University, the Houghton Library at Harvard University, the Library Company of Philadelphia, the Library of Congress, the Lilly Library at Indiana University, the Morgan Library, the New York Public Library, the Virginia Historical Society, all hold books from Washington's library in their collections. Most of